The wind howled through the shattered remains of the once great city, its mournful cries echoing against the empty streets. Shadows stretched long and eerie beneath the crimson glow of a setting sun, casting a somber light on the ruins that bore witness to a history of war, resilience, and sacrifice. Though the city had changed, though its people had suffered, one thing remained: Constantius' legend that had carried them through every dark hour. Among the wreckage, a lone figure stood, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. His armor, battered and scarred, were the insignia of a past many had thought lost, but he had returned, not as a mere warrior, but as a symbol of hope. Elias Drayden, the last surviving sentinel, had been thought dead, yet here he was, walking among the remnants of his fallen comrades. The war had taken its toll, but the fire in his heart still burned. He would not let their sacrifices be in vain. Far beyond the ruins, in the stronghold of the Dominion, Supreme Chancellor Valdric watched from his high tower. His reign had begun with blood and fire, and he intended to see it through with the same ruthless efficiency. He had crushed the old resistance, dismantled the rebellion, and silenced the voices that had once called for freedom. Yet, no matter how deep he buried them, the legend of the Sentinels refused to fade. A messenger arrived, kneeling before him. "My lord, there are whispers in the streets. The people speak of the return of the last sentinel." Valdric's eyes narrowed. "Elias Drayden?" The messenger nodded. "Yes, my lord. He has been seen near the outer ruins. He is gathering the remnants of the rebellion." The chancellor clenched his fists. He had spent years ensuring that the sentinels were wiped from existence. Yet here one stood, defiant as ever. If Elias sought war, then war he would have. He turned to his generals. "Mobilize the blackguard. Bring me his head." Far from the gilded halls of the Dominion, Elias moved through the underground tunnels beneath the city. There, survivors of the old resistance awaited him. Many were weary, tired of fighting, but the moment they saw him, something in their eyes flickered a glimmer of the past, a memory of what they had once fought for. "Elias," a voice called from the crowd. It was Leora, a former commander of the rebellion. "We thought you were dead." He shook his head. "I was close, but I could not let the fight die with me." She crossed her arms. "And now you expect us to take up arms again? We lost. Elias, the Dominion owns these lands. We have nothing left." Elias met her gaze with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "As long as we breathe, we have something left. The Dominion is strong, but it is not invincible. The people fear them, but they still whisper our names. They still remember what it was like to be free." A murmur spread through the gathered rebels. Hope was a fragile thing, but in the presence of Elias, it flared like a spark to dry tinder. Leora sighed. "And what do you propose?" "We take back the city. Not in open battle, it would be suicide, but in the shadows, where they least expect us." She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's remind the Dominion why they feared us." That night, the rebellion was reborn. The streets, once silent under the Dominion's rule, came alive with whispers of defiance. Small acts of resistance began to take shape. Supply lines were disrupted, enemy patrols ambushed, key officials vanished into the night. Each strike was calculated, each movement precise. Elias led them as he always had, from the front, inspiring those around him to believe once more. The Dominion responded with force. The Blackguard stormed homes, executed suspected rebels, and set fire to entire districts. But no matter how brutal their response, the rebellion did not break. Instead, it grew stronger. The legend of Elias Drayden spread like wildfire, and soon, even those who had never held a blade before were willing to fight. One night, Elias and a small force infiltrated the Dominion's central garrison. The objective was simply disable their communication lines and create chaos from within. The mission was going as planned until an ambush turned the tide against them. Trapped within the garrison walls, outnumbered and outmatched, Elias made a decision that would change everything. "Go," he ordered his companions. "I will hold them off." Leora refused. "We are not leaving you behind." He gripped her shoulder firmly. "If I fall, the legend will not die. You will carry it forward." With great reluctance, she and the others fled. Disappearing into the night, Elias remained, drawing his sword as the Blackguard closed in. The battle that followed was the stuff of legends. Elias fought with the fury of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Blades clashed, sparks flew, and blood stained the stone floors. One by one, his enemies fell, but they were relentless. Wounded and weary, he stood amidst the bodies of his foes, breathing heavily. Then, a slow clap echoed through the chamber. Chancellor Valdric stepped forward, flanked by his elite guard. A fine display, Sentinel, he mused, but you cannot win. Elias smirked, blood trickling from his lip. Winning was never the goal. Before Valdric could react, an explosion rocked the garrison. Smoke and fire engulfed the hall, and in the chaos, Elias disappeared into the shadows. In the days that followed, the rebellion surged. Inspired by Elias' defiance, the people rose in open revolt. The Dominion's forces, stretched thin and losing morale, began to crumble under the sheer will of those who refused to be oppressed any longer. And then, at the heart of the final battle, stood Elias Drayden. Facing Chancellor Valdric one last time, he raised his sword. This is for the fallen. Valdric sneered, you cannot kill an empire. Elias met his gaze, then we will build something better. With that, the two clashed in a duel that shook the very foundation of the city. In the end, it was not power or strength that won the day, but resilience, unity, and the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to dream of a better future. When the dust settled, the Dominion had fallen, and the people reclaimed their land. Elias Drayden, though battered and bruised, stood among them as a beacon of hope. His legend, no longer just a whisper in the dark, had become a roaring flame. And so, the new era began it with the rule of tyrants, but with the promise of freedom, carried forth by those who believed in the legend that would never die. The fires of revolution still burned in the hearts of the people, but the city stood at the precipice of uncertainty. The fall of Chancellor Valdric had marked a turning point. Yet Elias Drayden knew that true victory did not come from the defeat of one man. The Dominion had been shattered, but its remnants still lurked in the shadows, desperate to reclaim their grip on power. Elias had fought many battles, but this would be his greatest challenge, yet building something from the ashes. The streets that had once been filled with the sound of marching boots and fear-laden whispers were now alive with cautious hope. Citizens emerged from their hiding places, wary but eager to reclaim the city that had been stolen from them. The rebellion's forces, now the de facto rulers, faced the daunting task of maintaining order. Elias, alongside Leora and the other leaders of the resistance, gathered in what remained of the city's great hall, a symbol of the past that they hoped to reshape. We've won the war, Leora said, her voice edged with exhaustion, but keeping the peace will be harder. Elias nodded. The Dominion didn't just rule with an iron fist, they controlled everything: food, the supply lines, the economy. Without them, the city is on the brink of collapse. Across the table, Garrick, a former blacksmith turned strategist, frowned. Then we do what they never did. We listen to the people. It was a simple sentiment, but a powerful one. The Dominion had thrived on fear, crushing dissent before it could take root. Now, the city's future would be built on the voices of those who had suffered for too long. The days that followed were filled with relentless work. Elias and his comrades traveled through the districts, meeting with the people who had survived under the Dominion's rule. They listened to farmers who had been taxed into ruin, merchants whose trade routes had been severed, and families who had lost everything to the war. Slowly, trust began to grow, but trust alone would not be enough to sustain them. Word of the Dominion's remnant reached them like the first whispers of an approaching storm. Loyalists, still devoted to Valdric's fallen regime, had taken refuge in the eastern quarter, barricading themselves inside an old fortress. They had been abandoned by their leaders, left to fend for themselves in a city that no longer wanted them. Some called for blood, eager to wipe out the last vestiges of oppression. Others hesitated, unsure if more violence was the answer. Elias stood before the fortress gates, flanked by his most trusted fighters. He could see the fear in the eyes of the soldiers who still clung to their shattered empire. They were men who had been given orders their entire lives, conditioned to believe that obedience was survival. Without Valdric, they were leaderless, and in that, they were vulnerable. Leora stepped forward. You don't have to fight. The war is over. A silence hung over the battlefield. For a long moment, it seemed as if the only answer would come in the form of drawn blades. Then, one of the Dominion soldiers, a young man barely past his teenage years, lowered his weapon. One by one, the others followed. Elias released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We aren't here for vengeance. If you want a place in the city, you'll have to earn it. But the past doesn't have to define you. The transition from war to governance was slow and painful. Many were reluctant to accept former enemies as allies, and not all of the Dominion's loyalists were willing to surrender. Skirmishes broke out in the outskirts, where scattered warlords sought to reclaim their lost power. Elias and his people fought not only to protect their fragile new order, but to prove that they were not the same as the ones they had overthrown. As winter approached, the city faced its greatest test yet. The war had left them unprepared for the harsh season. With food stores dangerously low and infrastructure in ruins, desperation threatened to undo everything they had built. The black markets, once suppressed under the Dominion, flourished in the power vacuum. Elias knew that if he did not act swiftly, the people's faith in the new leadership would crumble. He turned to the merchants who had once served the Dominion, offering them a choice to lend their skills to rebuilding the trade routes or be cast out as opportunists. Many saw the wisdom in siding with the new order, and soon, the supply lines were restored. Farmers, once burdened by the Dominion's crushing levies, were given a fairer system. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start. Through it all, Elias found himself questioning the weight of leadership. He had been a warrior, a soldier fighting for freedom. But governance was a different battlefield. Every decision carried consequences, and the line between justice and compromise grew thinner with each passing day. He leaned heavily on Leora, Garrick, and the others who had fought beside him. Alone, he would have been overwhelmed. Together, they forged something new. One evening, as he walked through the city streets, he saw something that made his heart swell with quiet pride. A group of children played in the square, their laughter unburdened by fear. It was a simple thing, but it was everything they had fought for. Leora joined him, watching the scene unfold. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "We did it, and we're not done yet." The legend of Elias Drayden had been born in war, but it would live on in peace. The city, once broken, was healing. It would take time, and there would always be those who sought to reclaim the darkness of the past. But as long as there were those willing to fight for a better future, the new era would endure.